Language is deeply psychological. It goes on in people's brains by processes that are somewhat mysterious. We don't know how people acquire language so rapidly as children with just mere exposure to it. We don't know how people use and understand language, and we don't know what goes on in their brains when sentences come in, and there's reasoning or whatever going on, and then sentences come out. We have only a dim idea of what that is all about. But anyway, language, grammars, and including semantics, are all psychological entities.
Linguist and Professor Emeritus at the University of Texas, Robert Wall, joins the Plutopia podcast this time. We examine Dr. Wall's long career and his contributions to the study of language, mathematics, and computer science.
Bob is a linguist. He taught my Aunt Kathy. You were a teacher of Aunt Kathy, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and she was a linguist also. She spoke Portuguese. How many languages do you speak, Bob?
Oh, barely English.
All right. So
no, but we've had to learn about a lot of languages, and so
right.
I know some, from French, some German,
and
some
that
Danish, some.
Does that have to do with the Montague?
Not
that you
really.
had to learn that? Okay.
Not really. Although the Montague thing is supposed to apply equally well to any language whatsoever.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Any natural language, Portuguese or Swahili or anything, or to a logical language, an artificial language of logical, logical statements and so on.
Like, is it like AI or?
Yes.
So precursor, the early days?
I was going to talk about that. Yes.
Please tell us.
Well, let me tell you a little about where I came from, because I've been kicking around for a long time, and I am now fully retired.
Yay.
Although, it seems like I can never really actually retire.
People keep calling you for interviews.
That's the way it is. So I started out as a chemist. And so I was a chemistry major in college at the University of Illinois. And then I went to graduate school, also in chemistry. And at the time, let's see, that was in 1957. Could that be right? I think so. Right anyway, the Soviets had just put Sputnik up into the air. And so the whole country, including the military and everything, was in a tizzy because the Soviets had showed that they were superior to us and had beaten us to the punch. So the net result was that there was a lot of money if you were in, a technical field or scientific field. So I applied for a National Science Foundation scholarship, and of course I got it because everybody got it. And they said, where would you like to go? And I said, oh, I don't know. And I talked to the faculty, and they said, oh, you should go to Caltech. That's such a good place. You'll love it. And I said, well, what's the most expensive place? Since you're paying the way. And they said, well, Harvard tuition is the highest. So I said, well, I'll go there then.
Nice.
Okay, so that's how I got to Harvard in the chemistry department.
Wow.
I know. We're getting there. Okay. So I did 3 years of graduate work in chemistry, or 4, whatever, I can't remember. And at that point, I was getting pretty fed up with it. I was just bored. And I said, there's got to be something more interesting going on around here. And lo and behold, computers.
So, what year was this?
This would have been 1961 or something. Okay. So I joined the linguistics department so that I could get hired at the Harvard Computation Lab while they were doing Russian English machine translation.
Oh, wow.
With with rudimentary computers. I mean, they had a room-sized computer that was the descendant of the original one that came with vacuum tubes and everything.
And cooled down with ice
This
water.
was the Mark IV, whatever it was. Anyway, and they were trying to do machine translation from Russian to English, which of course, attracted money and everything. And so I said, well, I'd like to get in on this and see what's going on, So I did, and it was very interesting to be sort of in the computer biz back in those early days.
Yeah.
Was the memory in their big mainframe, whatever it was, Mark IV or something, was 32K. That's K. Not M, not G, not.
Wow.
There's more memory on my watch.
Yeah, I was gonna. It's
mainframe, and really
wow.
was to translate from Russian to English.
And how big was that computer?
Well, you mean in terms of physical size?
Physical size, yeah.
It was a whole room. I mean, it was, and it
Wow.
was, walled off. We couldn't get in there. It was all, and it had, whirling tape drives and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, when I, tried to write little programs and so forth, they were passed off to somebody who ran them first on a little auxiliary computer. I forgot how big it was, but it wasn't very big. And then if it didn't need to be, debugged or anything, then they would let this program go to the mainframe. So you could get a program run in about 2 or 3 days. Maybe,
Oh, wow.
if you were lucky. But of course,
Wow.
if it had a bug, they sent it back to you, and then you had to, and it was all on punch cards.
Oh, wow. That's
These were really the primitive days.
wow.
And the people who programmed the mainframe, the big computer in the big room, all did it in machine language. There were no
Oh, wow.
auxiliary languages available like Fortran or COBOL,
So it's
anything like that. They
oh,
wrote
wow.
instruction, right? Load the blah 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 blah. Move this to there, move blah blah blah. It was just
And
incredible.
wow, is that how the algebra got introduced to
Well,
the
that's
language?
that's what the program languages like Fortran and so forth eventually turn into, but it's just easier for us to write and read and debug the stuff
Right.
that's, not at such a low level. But this was really sort of right down in the nitty-gritty of where the machine was working and everything. And,
So the programs you were
how it was in the old days when we had to. So this was artificial intelligence back in the old days. And my job as a graduate student then was to look at the output of the English. They had a separate, of course, grammar for Russian. Things that would come in Russian would be typed and then sent through the grammar of Russian. And then somehow the grammar of Russian was going to be mapped into the grammar of English over here.
Huh.
So I worked on the computer part that was the grammar of English. And it was quite a job because the program was very unsophisticated. And one of the things that was holding things up was that there were so many analyses of a single sentence. There's so many apparent degrees of ambiguity for these sentences.
Yeah.
And that was because the grammar was just not very persnickety about what they allowed and so forth. So everything came out. So, a prime example would be the sentence, let's see, I saw a bear with my binoculars. With my binoculars can either be attached to the verb phrase see the bear, or it can be attached to the noun phrase the bear with my binoculars.
I'm
That
guessing
seems-
you probably had some problems with punctuation
Oh, yes.
causing a difference in what that same sentence meant just by the placement of
Yes, it was
commas.
all of that, and on an ordinary sentence that maybe had 5 or 6 dangling prepositional phrases on it, there were a gazillion ways that it could be attached, and then we didn't. So my job was to try to figure out some way that we could get a handle on what were the most plausible readings of the sentence. Which one of these, like in the bear example, is probably more plausible that I saw the bear with my binoculars attached to me see the bear
Oh,
versus the bear.
got it.
Okay, all right. So I was supposed to work with that and try to reduce the number of possible readings of these sentences. And so,
Okay.
well, we didn't do much. I mean, it was just so easy to just let it go. And I guess I only did this about 2 years, but then eventually they did, I think, manage to do some translation between Russian and English. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm assuming that there was text input, not actual recordings of the languages that were being.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they were doing, somebody was actually typing the thing into punch cards.
Yeah, that's quite different from the way the languages actually operate, because there's, both Russian and English, there are regional accents that make the same word sound totally different.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. A lot of variability that we were not equipped to handle, actually.
Am I right in thinking this is a little bit like Morse code, that like a certain deep means S, but it's written? Is that, am I?
Well, it was really hard to get a handle on this, because really the problem was to try to disambiguate these sentences, you needed to know something about what they meant. What was their semantics?
Right.
And we had no handle on that whatsoever. We were just looking at syntactic well formulas. Does it, have all the parts that a grammatical sentence is supposed to have?
Okay.
So it was, and anyway, it was a frustrating introduction to artificial intelligence, because it was just so clunky and so slow and so everywhere.
Oh.
But I guess it got better as time went on. I don't know when they eventually stopped the program, but they did. Tony Ottinger, the guy who was running it, did publish a book about the translations that they did, whatever. So they did something. I don't know, but I guess the money ran out. And then,
So the work that you were doing was part of a project that had a goal, right? You weren't just like, as a student, doing exercises in order to learn, but you were actually working on a project with a goal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
this was part of a government paid project. That okay,
Wow.
the Soviets are writing all this stuff, and we need to know, what it says. So we need to have a translation into English, but it's got to be quick, and we can't really wait for professional translators to do all this work for us. Well, okay, all right. So let me bloviating so much. So my next job after leaving the Harvard Computation Lab was I worked for IBM in San Jose, California.
Right on. That makes sense.
I was bitten by the computer bug. And they had a larger, more modern computer to work with. It still was a huge thing in a room, air conditioned by itself, and it had 64K of memory.
Oh.
Twice as much.
Ah, Oh my God.
Wow.
That's a lot of space for very little
Wow.
information.
We still had to use punch cards.
Oh my
And of course,
gosh.
at that time, this would have been 1963. Nobody had a computer on their desk. There were no such thing as distributed computing.
Wow. Well,
So once again, I would write out some code on paper on my desk. I would hand it to this guy across the hall, who would very nicely try to turn it into punch cards and take it over to, again, the auxiliary computer to see if it would run. And usually it didn't, because there's always bugs or, mistakes.
I'm surprised people continued to work on this.
Well, it's all we had.
Oh.
And
Yeah, and
we
it
were
lasted a long
just,
time.
enchanted by the notion that we were using computers to do this.
Right, right.
So this task was not translation, but I was supposed to take, what do you call them, abstracts of scientific papers and pick out index terms from these abstracts so that we could compile an index of the scientific publication, at the end. Okay.
Wow.
So it was to take this paragraph of description of what the study was all about, and then pick out basically nouns and noun phrases that described the study and were informative enough that they could go into an index. So, you left out it. So what we did was we scanned the stuff very haphazardly. I didn't really have a grammar or anything. I looked for things that looked like a noun or looked like a noun phrase.
Okay.
If it began with a V, or if it ended in TION, or if it was an obvious technical term,
Right.
6-hydroxy, blah, 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 something like that. So we picked out all of that stuff. And then the idea was a human being would go through the list and discard all the stuff that would not be a useful index term. Like, for example, if it started, in this paper, well, paper is a noun, okay, but it's not going to be a useful index term.
Right.
It's not about paper, it's about whatever they're studying, okay. So we have a scratch out list.
Oh, wow.
Like that in this study, in this paper, and blah, blah, blah. That has to be, but that was done by human beings.
Yeah, I'm like, this was all manual, right? I mean, you literally had a piece of paper that you scratched things out on. That is insane. Okay. I mean, any millennial watching this right now is like,
the linguistic part was finding the nouns.
Okay.
The noun phrases in all of this.
Wow.
But we didn't do it by grammars or anything. We just did it by appearances. Does it look like a noun? Does it begin with B or something?
Right.
End in TON or something like that. That's what we did.
Wow.
And lo and behold, we got about, on a good day, we got about 93% accuracy on this.
Whoa. And what year was?
Would pull out as index terms.
What was that year? How long did you work on that before?
I worked on that for about 2 years.
Well, that's pretty quick, though. I mean,
considering that the turnaround time for running your program was probably 3 or 4 days.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So, it was just, things were just, unbelievably slow and pokey and so forth. So anyway, okay, we got to speed this up a little bit. So after 2 years at IBM, I decided I really wanted to go back into academics. And so I applied for a job at Indiana University in Bloomington. And I was hired over the telephone because in those days, there were plenty of jobs. They were always looking for people in any field, particularly technical fields, and in academia as well.
What's a telephone?
Telephone. Well, we did have.
I remember.
We didn't have a computer on our desk, but we did have a telephone. Yeah. Okay. And so I packed everything up and drove to Bloomington, Indiana. And it was a little disorganized because I got there and they said, "Oh, you're the guy here to teach Sanskrit, right?" And I said,
Oh,
"No, never, I don't know any Sanskrit or whatever." And they said, "Well, who's going to teach Sanskrit then?"
oh God.
I said, "Well, it's not me, but you know." So
I guess I'll do it.
So in the meantime, so this would have been 1965 or so, I guess, 363, 5, yeah, 65. So at this point, Noam Chomsky, you know, the godfather of linguistics, had gotten involved in, well, categorizations of grammars and the kinds of things that they generate. So he was together with a French mathematician named Schutzenberger, and they did all of this stuff about if you made the grammar rule so-and-so, the kind of languages you could generate were like this. But if you made the rules like this, then they could generate even more. And if you did this, then you could generate even more, and so forth. And presumably a natural language like English was in this scale somewhere. You know, would it be like type 1, type 2, type 3, or so forth? So it got very mathematical in linguistics about this time. And so here I was, a green assistant professor at Indiana University. And so I decided my job, since I did know a little math by that time, was to make this kind of math that was involved by Chomsky and so forth into something that was understandable by linguistic students and so forth. So I wrote a book for that called Introduction to Mathematical Linguistics. So it was in press for a long time and so forth. And linguists did use it to try to learn enough math to kind of follow what Chomsky was doing and all of this business. You know?
Yeah. Okay.
So, okay, so that was fine. Well, it got me tenure. And then
You can't do better than that.
the politics and interviewing again. And so after 2 years at Indiana, then LBJ was president. And somehow, miraculously, the University of Texas was flooded with money.
Huh.
They had money for everything, for every department, for everything. They were just, you know, so they were
Wow.
just trying to hire people, you know, off the street practically to come and fill these positions so they could spend their money. And
You think that had anything to do with him being the president? Was that your insinuation?
well, I don't know how it happened that Texas had all this money.
Yeah,
But I
UT
wasn't
was
gonna
always
pass it up.
beneficiary of all the oil royalties that the state gave to the UT system, you know, quite some time ago.
yeah.
So they've always been flush with cash.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And so, well, a whole bunch of us from Indiana moved down here, sort of en masse, you know, because, well, there were all these jobs here. Please come. Here's a job. You know, here's the job. You know, whatever you want. You know.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got to the University of Texas,
Okay.
where I stayed for something like 32 years.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
apparently a really good job.
Yeah, well, except my salaries kept decreasing all the time.
Oh,
The top salary was at IBM.
sure.
And then, you know, to go from there to Indiana was another cut. And then to go to Texas was again another cut because these positions were not extremely well paid. They were just.
Well, what do we need? What do we need education for, really?
That's right. I mean, what's it all about anyway?
Okay.
So that's how I came to the University of Texas. And at this point, well, after working here a couple of years, the computer science department came over to the linguistics department, you can believe this, and said, we need help. We
What?
have so many students in computer science, we just don't know what to do with them. And in particular, there are all these math courses that we're trying to push them through. And we hear that some of you guys know the relevant math to, you know, and
Okay.
maybe you could help us out by teaching some of these math courses for the computer science students.
Is that okay?
Well, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I
said,
just,
well, okay.
okay.
And, because even so, it's still relatively hard to attract people to a linguistics program. I mean, it's not, you know, they're not beating down the doors to get to the linguistics department. But with computer science, they were.
Of course.
Said, and by the way, this is supposed to be a flunk out course because we've got to get rid of these students. So it's
Oh,
very, very tough. The grading has got to be very rigorous, right? And so go get them. So that was one of my jobs, was to teach this course in mathematics for computation for computers. another
wow.
thing, right?
Wow,
We
that's a
did. We
lot.
made it tough, and the students hated it. And a lot of the students went running over to the business school and said, you know, maybe I'll make my career over here, you know,
Okay.
instead of trying to do it as a computer scientist or whatever, and so on. So the computer science department was happy with that.
So it
And so
worked.
I taught this for, I've forgotten how many years. And, you know, so it was sort of my thing. I did a couple of linguistics courses on the side, but I was really the computer math guy.
Okay.
So that was what I did, you know. And so, of course, I had to write another book about this. And what happened was that the initial math book, well, you know, mathematics for linguistics, introduction to mathematical linguistics, it had finally sort of reached its sell-by date, and you know, it was no longer published. So I got together with a couple of my friends and colleagues, and we did a three-way joint book. They're supposed to cover everything you would ever need to know in math if you were in computers.
Okay.
Dealt with computers, whatever it is. And so it's over here on my shelf somewhere. Anyway, and it's still in print, believe it or not.
And you have that right there, don't you? Can you show it to us?
Say
You
what?
just, you held it up a few minutes ago.
Oh no, that's this one. This is the one to Montague Semantics.
Oh, okay. Okay. This is a different one.
This also happened about the same time
Okay.
when this became a hot topic. And again, it was mathematical, very mathematical. And so the other two faculty members, David Dowdy, well, he was a graduate student, but then graduated, and Stanley Peters and I decided that we were going to do a book to explain the mathematics and all of this to the poor, hapless linguists and computer people, you know, who needed to know how this stuff goes.
Right.
So here it is, and it's still in print, actually.
That's cool.
It's 300 and something pages or whatever it is, 310 pages. And so I was thinking, well,
Like a summer
you guys
read.
want to know about Montague Semantics? Well, here's the book. Just get the
I
book.
swear to God, I read about it in Wikipedia. I went to other, and I'm just like, it's not, and
Well,
maybe I don't do math very well at all.
It's very, very challenging.
So basically, is it what you've been talking about? Or is it a jump? Was there a jumping off point and that became?
It's a different thing.
Okay.
Different thing. Okay. So this was from Richard Montague, who
Okay.
was in the philosophy department at UCLA. And in the 1960s and 70s, Okay, another long story. He decided that he was doing logical languages, that is, grammars of languages that involve logical expressions and constants and things like that, you know.
Okay.
P and Q, R if then R then S and things like that, you know, so on. Okay, and those grammars are very constrained, and the associated semantics of them is also very constrained. And Montague at first was skeptical, but then later came around to the idea that the grammar and semantics of natural languages like English could be done in the same way as these grammars and semantics of these these logical languages. So I
Okay.
don't know if any of you have been through the mill in this, through a philosophy course or something where they gave you the grammar and the semantics of propositional calculus or predicate calculus or anything like this, right?
Nope.
If you were a philosophy student, you would have had to endure this.
Oh God.
And it's not easy. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Lots of stuff to cover. But then Montague, again, as I say, initially didn't think it would work, but then eventually came around to the idea that I think we can do natural languages like English the same way. Of course, there's going to have to be some changes and some jiggery-pokery here, you know, and things like that, because they're not the same languages, and their grammars are not going to be identical. But he thought that the grammars could be constructed according to the same principles.
So that when you say I saw the bear with my binoculars in English and in French, it would give you the same symbols.
Well, what it would do is it would label both of those things as ambiguous.
Okay.
In both in you know, English and in French, and then the corresponding semantics would give you two readings or whatever it is of those sentences, and then which reading was intended on a particular occasion by a particular speaker or whatever is not their job. That's pragmatics. That's the use of language in context and so forth by people in real situations.
Mm-hmm.
So the semantics is well, I should say the syntax is just simply a structural story about how the words and phrases and sentences of the language are put together, you know, so that we know in English that, you know, John hit the ball is an okay grammatical sentence in English, but John Baldy hit is not.
Right.
Okay, I mean so that's Chomsky's idea that, you know, what we're trying to account for in the grammar of English is the intuitions of the native speakers, their sense, because they know the grammar inherently, which things are allowable English sentences and which are not.
Okay.
That's sort of starting point. And so if we further take, you know, John hit the ball as a grammatical English sentence, well, how does it divide? Well, it divides up into John did something, and the did something is hit the ball, and that's, you know, a verb phrase, and John is the subject, the noun phrase subject is so forth. You know, back in the old day, we used to have to diagram sentences.
Yeah, I had to do that.
In English class.
Yeah, that was a thing. That was an actual thing.
It's not far from that to what you know, Chomsky linguistics says about the grammar of English. It says you know, it has a structure like this, which is a kind of tree structure with S for sentence at the top, and then it branches into maybe noun phrase and verb phrase, and those in turn branch into pieces like determiner and noun, and the verb phrase might branch into verb and noun phrase and so on down till you get to the actual words.
And this is expressed in a sort of code that looks like an algebra formula.
Something happened because
Uh-oh.
I forgot to turn this off on my phone. All right, now I've got a Zoom there. Okay, we're back.
You're still here, yes.
All right, I should have turned this to do not disturb, but okay, I'll do that. I'll do that. Because yeah, sometimes it will throw you off of Zoom.
It's true.
So yeah, so Chomsky's whole thing. I mean, you everybody's heard of Chomsky.
Yep. Love him.
Okay, Chomsky's whole thing. You know, I've probably been shot at sunrise for simplifying these things, but anyway, anyway, he said, no, look, I mean, there is, you know, a kind of structure, a tree structure that you can assign to, you know, every grammatical English sentence. And they have parts that are grammatical categories that, you know, we have studied, and noun phrases and verb phrases and prepositional phrases, and they're all put together in a particular way and all this sort of thing, you know. But there's more, says Chomsky, because there are pairs of sentences like John loves Mary and Mary is loved by John.
Okay.
And those are, at least in most readings, synonymous.
Right.
Is true, the other is true, and so on, you know. And so, but the words have been rearranged, and there's additional stuff thrown in, the is and the past participle and all of this kind of thing. So Chomsky says, well, there are these transformations that change the basic structure, which he calls the deep structure, into this changed, transformed version of the sentence, which ultimately comes out as the surface structure. And this is the sequence of words that's actually pronounced, you know, one at a time in actual speech, versus the underlying grammatical relations and so forth, you know, that are not immediately in evidence. Okay, and so that's what the transformational grammar business is based on. It's strictly speaking, how to put this? It's a, you know, it's a story told about the intuitions of native speakers of the language. Like if you ask, if you stop some, you know, random speaker on the street and say, you know, is John loves Mary, is that a grammatical sentence? Or John hit the ball, is that a grammatical sentence? And sure. How about the ball, John, or, you know, hit John the ball or something? Is that a grammatical sentence? Nah. No, okay. And so on. So this is what we're trying to account for. And then also the business, like Mary is loved by John and John loves Mary, are those basically the same meaning?
Right.
The intuition of most native speakers is, yeah, you know, pretty much, you know.
Yeah.
True, the other is true.
It's like translating from one language to another.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so, well, the whole Chomskyan program is sort of built on this structure. And one of the things that happened along the way is that people said, well, I'll tell you what, the meaning of the sentence, whatever it is determined by that deep structure, that original tree structure.
Okay.
Before the transformations come and mess everything up. Okay. And so the deep structure is supposed to give you the underlying grammatical relations among the parts and all things from which you can determine the meaning. Surface structure, the words that they actually appear, you know, in order and so forth, feeds into the phonological component of the grammar, that is, how things are pronounced.
Oh God. I forgot about that part.
Yeah. And then there's more too. I mean, you know, there's morphology about, you know, languages that have all these endings like Latin and so forth and blah, blah, blah. And then there's also pragmatics that we talked about, like what happens when you actually use languages in context and so forth, all that business. So, but in the Chomskyan tradition, then when they diagram, the parts of the overlying grammar, right? Well, here's the syntax, which tells you, how things combine to give, these basic underlying structures that are grammatical sentences. And then attached on the left over here is the phonology, no, not yet, sorry. And then there's the semantics. And in the Chomskyan thing, the semantics is generally just blank. There's nothing there.
Why?
Because Chomsky says, we don't really know anything about semantics. We know a little bit, that certain sentences imply other sentences. We know that certain pairs of sentences are mutually entailing. We know that certain sentences are, I'm struggling for the words, mutually contradictory or things like that. But as far as more detailed semantic knowledge, we still know. This is Chomsky.
Okay. And do you believe that too? Are you?
Well, you're asking me.
Yes.
I'm going to be Switzerland in this.
Ah.
My job is to tell you what various people believe. Montague rejected this totally.
Okay.
He said, I do not believe, right, that there's any serious difference between these logical languages that I'm studying over here and natural languages like English and French.
Okay.
Same techniques that can be used for, the logical languages can be borrowed over with modification, of course, for natural languages. And furthermore, he said, and the logical languages have a semantics as part of their whole structure. There is, a syntax, and then there is the interpretation of those things into the semantics. What kinds of things are the semantics? Well, here we're getting into deep waters, but Montague said it's truth conditions. So you hear the phrase truth conditional semantics batted around. And that was by Montague, who said, look, the job of semantics for English is just like the job of semantics for doing propositional calculus or whatever it is. It's to tell under what circumstances this sentence will be true. How is the world going to be? How does the world have to be for this sentence to be true? So, at a very simple level, it says, well, look, if the sentence, John hit the ball is true, it means that somebody, some entity named by John, and some entity named by the ball, and some, whatever it is, some function or something of it, right? If those are all the way they are supposed to be in the real world, then the sentence John hit the ball is going to be true.
Okay. Well, but if John actually didn't hit the ball, the sentence would still have the same meaning, even though it would be false.
But it says the meaning of the sentence is actually the the phrase is how the world would have to be for the sentence to be true.
Okay.
Okay, wait. I understand, but how would the world have to be for this sentence to be true?
So, this is where the philosophy gets deep. And,
okay.
And Montague says, look, the semantics of all languages, English or logical languages and so forth, are truth conditional. That is, they are supposed to tell you under what conditions this sentence would be true. What conditions, meaning how the world would have to be in order for this sentence to be true. Okay.
Okay.
So as you were saying, if John hit the ball, it was not true, then something went awry. Whoever is named by the noun phrase John is not the person who hit a ball, or whatever happened, it wasn't a ball that John hit, but it was a horseshoe or something or whatever. Okay, but it says the language is about the world and about conditions of things in the world, entities and relations among those things.
Is it like saying that?
Have to be. So that's what the semantic portion of the grammar is supposed to tell you. It says, here's a sentence. It's grammatical according to the grammar part of the whole deal. But it's also going to tell you, since it's about something, it's not just hanging there in space. It makes a statement about how the world is, or was, or will be, and all that. But it will say, as the world is, and then it tells you how the world would be if the sentence were true.
So what it's telling you is that John hits the ball is something that could possibly be true. Is that it?
In fact, given the way the world is, yeah. But certain sentences couldn't possibly be true. So the sentence, John hit the ball and John didn't hit the ball,
right,
could never be true, because the world could never be such that John hit the ball and John didn't hit the ball. Of course, relative to a particular time and place.
Right.
Okay. Okay. And certain sentences will entail other sentences. For example, the sentence John stayed and Mary left, okay, entails the sentence John stayed.
Right. Okay. It's
Right?
compound, right?
The second one has to be true. In other words, if the world is such that the first one is true, then the second one is also true, necessarily. That's,
yeah, that makes sense.
That sort of rudimentary idea that this is, getting at. Chomsky denounced this whole thing, saying it's just dogma.
What?
And it's false dogma at that.
Wow.
Now that sounds like Chomsky there.
In Chomsky's view, language is deeply psychological. It goes on in people's brains by processes that are somewhat mysterious. We don't know how people acquire language so rapidly as children with just mere exposure to it. We don't know how people use and understand language. We don't know what goes on in their brains when sentences come in and there's reasoning or whatever going on, and then sentences come out. We have only a dim idea of what that is all about. But anyway, language, the grammars, and including semantics, are all psychological entities.
Wow. I mean, wow. I never really.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this is a deep divide in the linguistics community. So as one I believe in.
But wouldn't Montague also have thought that language lived in the brain or was created in the brain?
Well, he certainly believed that there were psychological processes in the use and understanding of language, but he thought that was not central to the whole idea of giving a grammar, a syntax and semantics of the language. Said, yeah, sure. I mean, languages are spoken and used, and we talk to each other, we have ideas, in a language and so on. But that's another matter. That's not really part of determining what the semantics and the syntax of the language are.
In other words, there's a logical structure regardless of the psychological impacts.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, I just found on the internet the other day, let's see if I can find it here, a statement by Chomsky about artificial intelligence and the chat GPT or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Chomsky saying, well, this is all well and good, but it has nothing to say about the psychological reality of language. It's just a process by computer to go through and statistically, find matches or find, properties of all of this text and everything that it can use to produce all the stuff it produces, answers to questions and all that stuff. But it's not a thinker, said Chomsky, but people who use and understand language are thinkers.
So what are we missing then if we were simply to use the AI, I guess, that doesn't have the psychological component? How would you know?
Well, the people who are testing, GPT and all of that, by the way, that it's all in the papers every day now.
Yeah.
I mean, New York Times has 2 articles about,
I know, it's crazy.
GPT and everything, and so on, Well, but the people who developed it readily admit that whatever the thing is doing in generating an answer to your question, it's not thinking.
Well, it's computing. I mean, it's
computing.
Basically, you're making a structured query and you're getting a structured response, but the structure it conforms to natural language, right?
That's right. That's right. And so it bypasses all of this psychological stuff. So that doesn't enter into it. But it, because the stuff that's been scanned and put into their database and everything is mostly grammatical language, so whoever made those sentences and did those things that are in their database presumably had some psychological reality going on with it. So the sentences that come out are, they have the outward appearance of something that has been produced by a thinking individual.
I guess we're saying that the kind of conversational AI we're starting to see now has proved that Montague was right and that Chomsky was full of beans, right?
Well,
Hey, now y'all are getting into semantics.
yeah, okay.
Or beans,
Well,
one or the other.
I was thinking about this. I mean, how should we wrap this up? And I guess the thought that sort of stuck with me is, well, Montague Semantics is totally irrelevant. We can just forget about it.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
Because if I do think Chomsky is basically right that language, the grammar and syntax, semantics of language and so forth, is basically a psychological ability that we're partially inborn with and partially is acquired as we acquire language over time. And I think that that's basically right, even though we just don't know anything really about the semantics of natural language and how kids understand meanings and things like that.
Well, yeah, even animals.
On the other hand, the AI stuff, that is the chat GPT or whatever it is, has nothing to do with all of this, either Chomsky or
wow. So what is it?
To do with taking sentences apart and finding their deep structure or their syntax or anything like that. It's just we're looking for we're looking for these correlations between topics here and topics there and so on, and how these sentences were formed by thinking, breathing human beings is of no interest really to the GPT people.
And that's kind of sad, because what I love about language in general is the emotional content and the emotions that the words spring from, and you don't get that from
Chomsky
programs.
Point somewhere I can dig this out, but it says the GPT thing is maybe useful at finding rhymes for silly verses or something like that, you know. But as far as creating a poem, you know, from thought and knowledge of the language and all sort of thing, it's not what it does.
Right.
It takes pieces of this and pieces of that and pieces of this and everything and can make a poem. But there's no thought went into it.
Right. Right.
Or,
And I guess
awareness
that's,
of how the world is out there, you know.
man, that is
So
just,
we don't, you know, if the GPT people are right, we don't have to worry about analyzing, you know, the syntax and the semantics of these sentences, because what they're doing just works just fine.
Yeah,
The main thing we need to worry about is whether they include true facts or not, which they often
Well, of course,
don't.
there's that, you know, because it can be perfectly grammatical and still false.
right.
You know? So they gotta
Trump
work-
won, for
They got to
example.
work on that. They got to work on that.
Well, the
But,
only reason I see a use for Chat GPT is it might be good at composing quick and easy haikus, because it can probably count faster than syllables faster
Yeah,
than
they
I
said
can.
that the first version wasn't very good at haikus, but now this one is. It can really just
Oh,
Oh,
good.
make out haikus.
thank goodness. Now we
Yeah.
can all have the
Yeah.
best cards.
Yeah, but you know, so I think you know, the point is that looking at language this way from the you know, AI, GPT people, and so forth, just bypasses all of this other stuff about worrying about what is the nature of language, how does it manifest itself in human beings, and all that kind of stuff. They don't care. They don't care as long as it can produce, you know,
That's so
an
sad.
acceptable haiku or whatever it is. And so the people on Chomsky's side who are worried about this, how is it that language, you know, does grow in the human brain, and how does, you know, that allow us to use it as something without explicit instruction? I mean, you know, the idea is that children don't really get language instruction; they just get exposure.
Yeah, mimic.
Somehow, out of that, they figure out how to use English and, you know, all that sort of thing. How does that happen? Well, there has to be a large inborn component, says Chomsky, and that's part of the mystery of how our brains are wired. And so on.
That's fantastic.
Totally different things, you know.
Thanks for coming on and talking to us, Bob. This is fascinating.
Well, okay, well,
Yeah, this is great.
I can do this forever, you know. But
Okay.
Does that mean that you'll come back?
Well,
Yeah.
Because we will invite you back.
Yes, we
if it's
will.
We've been
if
known to
it's
do that.
As pleasant as this has been, you know, I will try. But I
It's
have
all-
to tell you that I am 86 years old, and some days are better than others. So, you know,
I know.
it might be iffy. So
Well,
anyway,
we'll try
thank you.
anyway.
Thank you for your attention and your listening and everything.
You can stay in touch with Plutopia at plutopia.io. On Facebook, look for @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.